Imagine being the most powerful man in the world, only to find yourself surrounded by enemies on every side. This was the terrifying situation Napoleon Bonaparte faced in the winter of 1814. After his disastrous invasion of Russia that had cost hundreds of thousands of lives, he returned to France, only to see his empire crumbling and his enemies closing in. Against overwhelming odds, with armies 6 times larger, marching toward his borders, Napoleon relied not on numbers but on speed, cunning, and brilliance. In the span of just 6 incredible days, he delivered 4 victories against superior forces, reminding the world why he had been hailed as a military genius. Yet in the end, even these triumphs could not save him or his empire. This is the story of Napoleon's 6 days campaign, the last blaze of his genius. Before the fall by January 1814, the French Empire was collapsing. Only months earlier, in October 1813, Napoleon had fought the colossal Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations. There he lost nearly 300,000 men in one of the largest battles Europe had ever seen. Another 100,000 of his soldiers remained trapped in German fortresses, cut off and surrounded. When Napoleon finally limped back into France, he had just 70,000 men left from what was once the most feared army in the world. Now the nightmare truly began. From every direction, enemy armies poured into France. Britain, Austria, Prussia, Sweden and Russia united in a coalition determined to finish Napoleon once and for all. More than 400,000 troops marched into France from 3 sides. The largest army, 156,000 men under Prince Schwarzenberg, advanced from the east. From the North Field, Marshal Blucher stormed forward with over 77,000 hardened Prussian troops. Others followed behind, sweeping across French territory. Against this invasion, Napoleon could muster only 70,000 soldiers, spread thin across a massive frontier stretching from Strasbourg to the North Sea. The odds were hopelessly against him, 6-1, and as if this imbalance was not enough, Napoleon's army was no longer the seasoned Grande Armée that had conquered Europe in years past. Many of his veterans were dead or captured. In their place stood raw recruits, the so-called Marie-Louises, named after the decree by Napoleon's young wife, the Empress Marie-Louise. These boys were barely more than children, some only 14 years old, scarcely taller than their muskets. They had just 2 weeks of training before being thrown into the fire of war. Lacking proper uniforms or even weapons, many of them went into battle sharing muskets. One young recruit famously told Marshal Marmont, "I would shoot as well as any other soldier if I had someone to load my gun." It was a tragic symbol of how desperate France had become, sending its children to fight for survival. Most observers believed Napoleon's only chance was to retreat and defend Paris itself. But Napoleon saw something his enemies overlooked. Their sheer numbers were also their weakness. By spreading their vast armies across France, they opened gaps between their forces. After Napoleon's initial defeat at La Rothière on February 1st, where 100,000 coalition soldiers crushed his 40,000 men, it seemed all was lost. Yet then, fortune presented him with a chance. Field Marshal Blucher grew frustrated with the slow, cautious Austrians, seeking food and shelter. For his men during the bitter winter, he marched his Prussian army away from Schwarzenberg's main force. Suddenly, the coalition armies were divided. Napoleon recognized the mistake instantly. He abandoned plans for retreat and turned to strike. With 30,000 men and 120 cannons, he dashed toward Blucher, determined to destroy his scattered corps before they could reunite with the Austrians. His strategy was the central position. By holding the center, Napoleon could use the excellent French roads to shift his smaller army quickly between separated enemy forces, hitting each one in turn before they could combine. It was like facing 6 enemies in a fight, but forcing them to come at you one at a time. Speed would be his greatest weapon. This daring plan was possible not just because of geography, but also because of rivalries within the coalition. Austria wanted a negotiated peace, keeping Napoleon on his throne, but weakened. Russia and Prussia wanted his total destruction. Their distrust slowed coordination and gave Napoleon the opportunity he needed. Between February 10th and February 14th, 1814, Napoleon launched one of the most brilliant lightning campaigns in history, The first strike came at Champaubert on February 10th. With swift maneuvering, Napoleon's 30,000 troops descended on a Russian force of just 4,000. In a few hours, he overwhelmed them, capturing their general and killing or capturing most of their men while suffering only 200 casualties. The next day, he turned on another enemy at Montmirail. Here, 25,000 French faced 39,000 coalition soldiers. Napoleon attacked their weak points with precise coordination, and despite the odds, he triumphed again, inflicting 4,000 losses. On February 12th, he continued his pursuit at Château-Thierry. As the coalition forces retreated across the Marne River, Napoleon pressed relentlessly. His men stormed the bridges and drove the enemy back, leaving 4,000 more dead while losing only 600 themselves. Then came the climax on February 14th at Vauchamps. The Prussians under Blücher attempted a surprise attack on Napoleon. Instead, they walked into a trap. Napoleon turned his cavalry loose. French horsemen thundered across the open fields, smashing into the Prussian lines and breaking them apart. In the chaos, the Prussians lost 10,000 men. French losses were barely 600. In just 6 days, Napoleon had defeated 4 armies one after another. With 30,000 soldiers, he had inflicted nearly 30,000 casualties on forces twice his size while suffering only about 4,000 losses. The ratio was staggering: nearly 10 enemies defeated for every Frenchman lost. It was a dazzling display of tactical brilliance. Napoleon's success came from several key factors. First was speed. His men marched incredible distances through freezing mud, often covering 50 kilometers in a day. This allowed him to appear where the enemy least expected. Second was his mastery of terrain. He chose battlefields that favored him, such as flat plains perfect for cavalry charges. Third were the mistakes of his enemies. Their armies spread out and quarreled, leaving themselves vulnerable to defeat in detail. Lastly, Napoleon coordinated his arms superbly. Infantry held the line, artillery shattered enemy formations, and cavalry finished the job with devastating charges. Each part of his army worked together like pieces on a chessboard. For a brief moment, it seemed as if Napoleon had regained his old magic. Europe trembled at the news of his victories. But the truth was harsher. The 6 days campaign, though brilliant, could not alter the fundamental reality. Napoleon was hopelessly outnumbered. Even after losing tens of thousands, the coalition still had hundreds of thousands more advancing. Napoleon, by contrast, could not replace his losses. Every young recruit who fell could not be replaced fast enough. Worse, the coalition armies were not all in front of him. While he won in the countryside, other forces pressed inexorably toward Paris, the true prize. Napoleon could win battles, but still lose the war if the capital fell. Politics also turned against him. The French people, after 20 years of nearly constant warfare, were exhausted. They longed for peace at any price. Napoleon's marshals, too, grew weary. They had once followed him across Europe, but now questioned his judgment. On March 30th, 1814, Paris itself came under attack. After just 1 day, the city surrendered. Even Napoleon's marshals refused to continue fighting. One of them, Marshal Marmont, betrayed him outright, surrendering his entire army to the coalition. The once unshakable loyalty that had built his empire evaporated. Facing the inevitable, Napoleon abdicated the throne in early April. His 6 days of brilliance could not save him from defeat. He was exiled to the island of Elba off the Italian coast. Though he would return for one final dramatic campaign in the 100 Days, the empire he had built over 2 decades was gone. The 6 Days campaign remains one of the most astonishing feats in military history. In less than a week, Napoleon proved again his unmatched genius for speed maneuver and decisive strikes. Against overwhelming odds, he humbled armies far larger than his own. Yet it was also a tragic lesson. Genius on the battlefield could not compensate for exhaustion, at home superior numbers abroad, and the relentless tide of history. Napoleon's story in 1814 is the story of a man fighting not just armies, but inevitability. For 6 days, he turned a back time and reminded the world of his brilliance. But even the greatest general cannot win when his nation no longer has the will to fight.